Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan and around the world. I'm Herel Hughes. The International Criminal Court is set to issue an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A similar warrant has already been issued for Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2023. The court, or the ICC, is a member-based court that holds individuals accountable for war crimes. Some experts in Taiwan believe that joining the ICC could deter Chinese President Xi Jinping in his plans to take the island by force. To learn more about this, we are joined today by Professor Kevin Chang. Kevin teaches international law at National Chengchi University in Taipei and has more than 20 years professional and field experience serving the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Australian government. He is also a certified investigator for human rights and war crimes. Kevin, welcome back to the show. We're so happy to have you.
Great to be back.
So first I want to zoom out. What exactly is the International Criminal Court?
The ICC is a treaty-based international court and it's established by states. And this was a process that went through about 5 or 6 decades of negotiation. Basically, it was inspired by what happened in World War II and thereafter to seek accountability for the worst crimes committed by mankind, for mankind. There were 2 tribunals, of course, after World War II. The Nuremberg Tribunal was for the Nazi Germany leaders. They were tried there, and then the Imperial Japan leaders were tried at the Tokyo trials. The reality is that these most serious crimes continue being committed. Even though they may happen a little less frequently, we see genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed all the time. There's been a lack of willingness or capability by national jurisdictions to deal with these crimes. And before the establishment of the ICC in 2002, there was no international forum to deal with that. So the efforts to establish the ICC were paralyzed during the Cold War, but of course it was revived in the 1990s. And we saw the Rome Conference of July 1998, where 120 states adopted the Rome Statute of the ICC, and therefore it was created and operational since 2002.
You've mentioned the Rome Statute. What is that?
Yeah, so the Rome Statute is basically the constitution that makes up the International Criminal Court. It's like the UN Charter to set up the United Nations. The significance of the Rome Statute is also that for the first time in the history of humankind, states voluntarily decided to accept the jurisdiction of a supranational court, if you like. So they give up some of their own jurisdiction and sovereignty in order to prosecute the perpetrators of the most serious crimes. So the primary mission of the ICC is to end impunity for the perpetrators of these crimes and thereby contribute to the prevention of these crimes.
So the court was established in 2002. What are some of the most significant cases we've seen?
Yeah, sure. So in 2012, the ICC made a groundbreaking decision by convicting Thomas Lubanga. Now, he was a rebel leader from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and this was a landmark decision because it was about the criminality of recruiting and using child soldiers. Jean-Pierre Bemba, he was a former vice president of the DRC. He was convicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this was significant because this is almost a head of state as the vice president. The court is also currently deciding on the case of Al Hassan, who is a vital member of the Islamic police from Mali. Now, this relates to, he was accused of many crimes, but this will be the first decision concerning the destruction of cultural heritage, which is also a war crime. The ICC has opened a full investigation on the situation concerning the Rohingya people. Now, that's a very innovative situation regarding jurisdiction because it's able to exercise jurisdiction through the fact that many Rohingya people have crossed their border from Myanmar into Bangladesh. Now, of course, Myanmar is not a party to the ICC, Bangladesh is. So the ICC is able to exercise jurisdiction for crimes that have a cross-border element to it. So these are some of the ways the court has made significant decisions, but also made innovative approaches to advance international criminal justice.
So the International Criminal Court is set up to hold individuals accountable. How does that work? You mentioned it's a membership-based organization. Where does that come into play?
Yeah, sure. So there are 124 state parties to the Rome Statute. This includes virtually all Western European states, the majority of African and Latin American states. Now, Asia has a relatively low rate of ratification compared to the other regions. In terms of who can be prosecuted, there are 2 types of jurisdiction. Firstly is a territorial-based jurisdiction, which is any person who committed crimes in the territory of a state party to the ICC is liable, and that includes the nationals of that state and also foreigners. So in the case, of course, Russians who have committed crimes in Ukraine. The other thing is sort of like what we call personal jurisdiction, which is any national of a state which is a party to the Rome Statute. So for example, if Switzerland is a party to the Rome Statute, any Swiss national committing any crime in Switzerland or anywhere else is subject to jurisdiction. There's a third way for jurisdiction to be activated for non-state parties. That relates to a referral by the UN Security Council to the International Criminal Court, to the prosecutor, actually.
Can you tell us what are some of the biggest criticisms of the International Criminal Court?
Yeah, well, firstly, some countries are not comfortable with giving up part of their sovereignty. Now, even though the court is a court of last resort, some states, of course, who are at risk of or have committed some of these crimes really don't want the court in The Hague to be investigating and ultimately arresting its leaders. The other criticism of the ICC in terms of its operation is that there's been some criticism that in its early years, at least in its first 15 years or so, its cases were almost exclusively African cases of African leaders, Democratic Republic Congo, Mali, Central African Republic, and so on. So there's been criticism by some African leaders that the ICC has African bias, and that adds to the unhelpful consideration that ICC may be a Western creation trying to try other so-called uncivilized people. That's part of the image that ICC has to overcome. We've seen the ICC taking very proactive steps in terms of its investigations in Myanmar, in Russia, Ukraine issue, and also other parts of the world now. So the ICC is trying to get rid of that image, if you like. But the ratification rate in Asia remains low, and I think that's an area of priority for not only the court, but for the cause of universal justice.
Well, I actually think that's a perfect time to zoom in, and we want to focus a bit more on Asia. So you've actually been a really strong advocate that Taiwan should become a member of the ICC. So what are some of the benefits that Taiwan would see from that?
First is the moral and legal obligation. By joining the ICC, Taiwan says to the world, it's an important statement that we support accountability for the worst crimes of humankind, and we stand in solidarity with victims. Secondly, of course, ICC is an important international organization, and by joining the ICC, this improves Taiwan's international standing, participation, and also supports Taiwan's cooperation with other states. Thirdly, by joining the ICC, Taiwan takes on responsibilities as a party of court, and Taiwan also pledges, of course, not to commit these crimes itself. And fourthly, Taiwan already has certain obligations to the ICC, even when it has not joined, because of its general obligation to international law. For example, Taiwanese nationals are already exposed to ICC jurisdiction. If a Taiwanese national commits a crime in a country of a state party to the ICC, then that person is liable to accountability, and Taiwan is expected to cooperate with the court for any person who may be wanted by the ICC. This also includes people who may be coming to Taiwan. So you may think that it's not possible that Putin comes. Well, what about an Israeli soldier who's now serving in Gaza? What's the likelihood that in 5 or 10 years' time, that person will come just on a holiday? That's entirely likely. It's entirely likely also that some of these people wanted by the ICC have already visited Taiwan, but we just don't know about it because we don't have these procedures. So this is an opportunity for us to upgrade our legal system. And finally, it's my view that, and this is not the main reason, but I think this is a reason on many people's minds, it's firmly in Taiwan's national security interest to be under ICC jurisdiction. And the reason is because this will serve as a deterrent on any state that wishes to attack Taiwan. Now, of course, this is not the only factor that would deter a war on Taiwan, but anytime you have wars, you will have war crimes. So if it's possible to imagine a war happening in Taiwan, it's possible to imagine war crimes in Taiwan. And this is when you need the deterrence effect of the ICC jurisdiction, so that any state that wishes to wage war will have to calculate on the probability and the likelihood of that person being sent to The Hague if Taiwan was to submit itself to ICC jurisdiction.
So what would Taiwan have to do to become a member of the ICC?
So for Taiwan to join the International Criminal Court, there are two ways. One is to ratify the Rome Statute, and Taiwan can decide to ratify the Rome Statute just like it has ratified CEDAW and ICCPR. This requires a domestic decision of approval, followed by a deposit of the ratification instrument internationally. Now, under Taiwan laws, any treaty obligations must also be passed by the legislature. So that's ratification. There's a second way to join, though, that's even easier, which is to voluntarily accept jurisdiction by the court. Now, this was done by Ukraine and Palestine. Palestine has since, of course, joined as a full member, but even though Palestine in many ways has a weaker claim to statehood than Taiwan, being questions around its territory and its control of that territory, nevertheless, Ukraine is now, of course, not a member of the ICC, but it has voluntarily accepted ICC jurisdiction. This is a completely unilateral act by the state, so if Taiwan wishes to do that, it requires an executive decision by the state, the foreign minister or the president, with a letter sent to the court's registry. There's no official process for the court to respond or to confirm jurisdiction.
What does this say about Taiwan statehood then?
Any state can be a party to the ICC. The Rome Statute doesn't say you have to be a UN member state or anything like that. It's just any state. Now, who decides on that state? Well, generally, the court will decide how to interpret its own constitution. So the court, this is not a situation where 148 members vote on Taiwan's membership. It's not like that. So if Taiwan satisfies the international law criteria as statehood, because of course Rome Statute is an international treaty, it will be governed by international law. Under customary international law, most legal scholars and legal experts believe that Taiwan already satisfies all the criteria of statehood, having a government, territory, permanent population, and capacity to enter international relations. And there's no precedent where applicant statehood has been rejected or challenged by the International Criminal Court. So when it comes to international law, Taiwan is on pretty good ground in terms of statehood. When it comes to international politics, then of course you're subject to the political opinions of other states. This is not the case here, so Taiwan has significantly lower hurdles here.
And what obstacles would Taiwan face in joining the ICC?
So of course, generally, China is the biggest political obstacle to Taiwan seeking to join any international organization. Well, the good news for Taiwan is that China is not a party to the ICC and has no prospect of joining the ICC. And most of China's allies also are not members of the ICC. Now, that doesn't mean that China won't rally its supporters against Taiwan, but there are significantly lower hurdles around here. And also, most of Taiwan's allies, Western European states, are strong supporters of the ICC. The United States has its own reason for not joining the ICC as a global superpower that regularly engages in armed conflicts around the world. But the United States has also pledged its support for the ICC. For example, the US President Joe Biden is fully behind the investigation of Vladimir Putin and all the Russians committing war crimes. So that also should not be a factor for Taiwan to be concerned about.
What about internally in Taiwan? Has there been any movement towards joining the ICC? Any discussions? You've mentioned the foreign minister, you've mentioned the president. Has anything been happening that we can look out for?
The ICC has been around for a while. It's not a new organization. It's been around for 22 years. So I think people expect the government to have already formulated a position on this. As was reported in The Guardian on New Year's Eve, the Taiwanese government has been actively considering different ways of ratifying or voluntarily accepting ICC jurisdiction. It's really a matter for the Taiwanese government to be taking the next step. There's also a domestic mandate within Taiwan for accepting ICC jurisdiction because this came out as a recommendation of the two human rights treaties expert committee recommendation to voluntarily accept jurisdiction to the ICC. And just one last thing, the International Criminal Court has an interest to admit Taiwan because the International Criminal Court's mission is to universalize international criminal justice, and that it's not in the interest of the ICC or the UN or anybody to have a territory in Taiwan of 23 million people where criminals can roam free, where war crimes can happen. That's not the interest of international criminal justice. And also, given the very low ratification rate of the ICC, I think the ICC will be very keen to see Taiwan's enthusiasm on this matter.
Well, Kevin, I think that's all the time we have today. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Zoom In, Zoom Out. I really learned a lot.
Thank you. Happy to be back again.
Yeah. This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, follow us on social media. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.